gathering. It's so special because we have our fourth graders here who are going to depict various people in town and give what they have learned in their history lesson on Georgetown. So we're excited to have the fourth grade here with their teacher, Lily, here. And thank you all for coming. And so anyway, we'll proceed here with our fourth graders giving us a great history lesson on Georgetown and
donation.
okay, that's right, I'm coming. And that we have a donation can back there by the back door. Ellen has it, Mrs. Elliott has it on top of her head. And that is because we are not charged for having the program here. So we're hoping that everybody will contribute to the can so that we can maintain the same situation that we've maintained for numerous years. So the can is right back there by the door. Every little penny counts because we love to have this program so everybody can come. So thank you for all being here, and at this moment, I will speak and introduce our fourth grade teacher, as I know her only this little.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. This is at the same time thrilling as terrifying. And so many of you are here. So, thank you, thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I am Lily Redfield, and I am the fourth grade teacher at Georgetown Community School, where I've taught for the past 6 years. I would like to take a second right now to introduce several students who we will hear from later tonight. So when I call your name, I'd like you to stand up, turn to the audience, and just give a little wave or a little howdy or a little whatever, all right? So we will start with Ethan Magarachi Waikore. Wes Preston. Lakin Roscoff. And Finn Fulton. We also have Grayson Gozinski here tonight. He won't be presenting, but I do want to shout out that he is here. Thanks for being here, Grayson. Tonight, I will be leading you through a local history curriculum that I have had the honor of developing and teaching for the last 5 years or so. Before we begin, though, I would like to take just a moment and thank the numerous partners we have in the community who make this program possible every single year. We would not be able to have a local history curriculum if we did not partner with community members. So first of all, I would like to thank Historic Georgetown Incorporated, and most specifically, Cindy Neely and Ellen Elliott. I would like to thank the Hotel de Paris Museum, Mr. Kevin Kuharek, Georgetown Energy Museum, Mr. Norman Frank, the Hamel House Museum, Miss Nancy Hale, Niselyn Anderson, Miss Cora Lou and Wendy Anderson, the Heritage Center and the Archives, Mr. Paul Boat and Miss Christine Bradley, and the Clear Creek County Library District, specifically John Tomei Memorial Library, Miss Libby Kaplan, and the Georgetown Trust. So a round of applause, please, for our community. In addition, I would also like to thank Mr. Earl Ballard, who comes in every year to talk with our students about Georgetown history, and specifically the fire stations and the fire department in Georgetown. I would also like to take another moment to thank especially Ellen Elliott, Cindy Neely, and Norma Hafenstein. They were the 3 women that really had the idea behind this and approached me 5 years ago with this idea. So without them, this would not have come to fruition. So thank you. Finally, we of course could not do this without the students and their parents for coming, taking a Friday evening to come and do something outside of school hours. I really, really appreciate it. So thank you, students and parents, for being here. And last but not least, I would like to thank Georgetown Community School. I feel very, very lucky that I get to work where I do. I get to work in a school that allows me the freedom to pursue and to do something like this, which is not the case everywhere. So thank you, Georgetown Community School. So a little bit of background. In late 2018, early 2019, like I mentioned, I was approached and began discussing with Ellen Elliott, Cindy Neely, and Norman Hafenstein the possibility of creating a local history curriculum that would partner Historic Georgetown Incorporated and Georgetown Community School and build a curriculum that really highlighted Georgetown's local history. It would be a supplement to our Colorado history curriculum that we already teach in 4th grade. I'm a history minor. That was something that I studied, and I've always been interested in local history, especially local Colorado history. So it was right up my alley. I was very excited and jumped on board. We had several planning and brainstorming sessions that year where we created essential questions and goals that we wanted to cover through this curriculum. Some of the goals were: 1, take advantage of the incredibly historic nature of our community. 2, have students gain a sense of ownership for their local history. And 3, highlight the importance of historic preservation. To that end, we ultimately realized that the Georgetown Silver Plume National Historic Landmark District was the perfect and unique location to supplement the 4th grade state social studies standards by using the history and the built environment of the town of Georgetown and the surrounding area as a kind of living laboratory for the study of history, geography and geology, civics, people and demographics, economics, research skills, and presentation skills. So, as any good teacher will tell you, when you're teaching a curriculum, you really try to integrate as many different areas of study as possible so that you have a lot of different angles coming at it. Students are able to explore from whatever area of study they most connect with. So, while I will be presenting this linearly, going through our web and showing how this curriculum really highlights each of these areas of study, I do want to put forth the caveat that when we teach this, when I teach this and we go through this curriculum, it is not nearly as linear as I'm presenting it right now. We hit these areas and then we bounce off, we hit them again from a different angle. It's much more interwoven, but for the sake of this presentation, I will be covering each of these topics kind of in a linear fashion. What does remain consistent is that each year, the culmination of our unit ends with a research and presentation program where the students do choose someone from Georgetown or the surrounding area's history. They study that person, and then we do a presentation of that person, which you will see some of them tonight. So obviously, we couldn't have a local history program without studying history. So another constant is that we always start our unit by discussing what history is and then diving into the history of Georgetown specifically. We do this by creating a giant timeline that goes around one side of our classroom up at the top. It's massive. And we really dive in and we look at Georgetown's history. We divide the timeline so that the top has world events going on in Colorado, events going on in the United States and the world. And then down below on the bottom half, we see where Georgetown, certain dates in Georgetown, fit into that more expanded view. And as we go through the curriculum, we add on to this timeline, we add different things to it, but it really helps to start out by having kind of a grounding idea of what is the story of Georgetown. Once we go through all of the dates that I've chosen to include on the timeline, we then hone in on 10 dates specifically, and the students create a story map. So in language arts, you'll often see like story arcs where you have rising action, tensions building, then you have kind of the climax of your story, then the falling action and some sort of resolution. We chose 10 dates from Georgetown's history to kind of map out the story of Georgetown following this same pattern. What's kind of fun though is you can also look at this as almost a graph in terms of Georgetown's population. So the first date we focus on is 1859, which is when two brothers, Dave and George Griffith, came up and they discovered gold near where present-day Georgetown is, and they sent the word out, there was gold, and then, so obviously we see a little bit of population rise. Then in 1862, the gold had kind of started to dry up, so not that much longer. There was not very much gold left. What was left was very difficult to mine. They didn't think it was worth it. So for a little bit, it seemed like Georgetown was going to be just another kind of gold bust town. Then in 1864, silver was discovered. And silver being discovered changed everything for Georgetown, because that is what made it so that Georgetown was an established town that thrived. And so we see here our population skyrockets over the next couple of decades. In 1890, the Sherman Silver Purchase Act is passed at the government level. This act required the United States government to purchase silver, and lots of it. So that was a very good thing for people living in Georgetown. People were very excited about that. But then in 1893, we hit kind of the climax of our story. 1893 is when the Sherman Silver Purchase Act was repealed. They took back the Sherman Silver Purchase Act. And that was a problem, because the people in Georgetown, silver mining was what made this town. And so when you didn't have a government purchasing lots of silver, that became a problem. So over the following decades, you saw a sharp decline in Georgetown's population till by the 1930s, you only had about 300 people living in Georgetown, when at one time there had been about 5,000. So this is kind of our falling action, and then we hit kind of almost Georgetown's rebirth. So after that, tourism starts to kind of become a bigger player in Georgetown's history. I-70 is opened, access to the mountains is much easier at that point. World War II is done, automobiles are becoming more popular, more affordable. So you see a rebirth start to happen in Georgetown. And then in 1966, that's the last date that we take a look at. That is when Georgetown Silver Plume became National Historic Landmark District. And that kind of solidified that Georgetown and Silver Plume weren't really going anywhere. So those are the 10 dates we look at. We follow it like it's a story map, like an arc. And then the students take it a step further, and they create a comic strip that goes along with those 10 dates. We spend a lot of time on this at the beginning, because everything following this really has to do with, do you understand Georgetown's story? What kind of, what brought it to be? What is making it continue on? And so everything else in our curriculum follows from this. So we really spend a lot of time making sure the students understand the story of Georgetown. All right, then we get to go on a lot of field trips, and that's really fun. Like I said, we live in a very unique and wonderful community that does have a lot of its history very actively preserved, and we get to benefit from that. So our local field trips do an amazing job of highlighting all of the different ways with which we can interact with local history. We visit the Heritage Center and the archives, and when we go there, the students really get to see our local history and how it is stored in a more concrete form, as well as digitally. So students get to have fun with, very old things, but then they also get to see how are the archives evolving, and how are things being stored digitally as well as in a concrete way. The students get really excited about visiting the old school. I think it's really fun to see our school, and then to go as a child to the old school and imagine yourself being a student there. They get very excited when they get to ring the bell, and every student gets a chance to ring the bell. I always get a little nervous that people of Georgetown are going to think there's some sort of emergency when they hear 10 to 12 bell rings go off at a time, but it's never happened, so I think we'll continue on. But at this point also, when we've reached the Heritage Center and the archives, we have started in class to discuss primary versus secondary sources. And the archives are a great way to help solidify examples of both of these. It also continues the discussion that we've started at this point about the preservation of history and why that's important. They get to see firsthand how historic buildings can be repurposed with intentionality. Obviously, the old school used to be a school. Now it's not. It's a community event center. It's a workspace. The archives are stored there, and so the students get to start to understand that these old buildings, they can be repurposed intentionally. Oftentimes, I feel like history can seem really stuffy, kind of old, irrelevant, unapproachable, and the archives and the Heritage Center help to show that this is not the case. It's something that you can definitely interact with. It's something that is ever changing and it influences us today, and it's a great place to start. Some of the other field trips we get to go on is obviously the Hotel de Paris. The students love getting to go to the Hotel de Paris. It's a very exciting time, even just walking in and they see all of the different artifacts right up front. They get very, very excited. We are very fortunate that we get to go every single year. And it continues our discussion of preservation, restoration, and approachability when we get to visit the Hotel de Paris. Several of the people that students choose to study every year are always connected to the hotel. This year we had 2 students choose people to study that are very much connected to the hotel. So I made sure to take pictures when we were in those locations. This is Wes, you'll see him later tonight, but he's Louis Dupuis, and so he is in Louis Dupuis' kitchen there, pretending to cook. And then we had Lyric here. She was studying Sophie Galley, who was the housekeeper at the Hotel de Paris, and she was Louis' aunt. So Sophie is standing here in front of her room. We get to go to the Hamel House. The Hamel House is another great example of historical preservation in action. It's been really cool to see and discuss with students the fact that preservation is an ongoing process. It's not a one and done kind of deal. It is ongoing. And it's been really cool. Over the years of doing this curriculum, like I said, I've taught this for about 5 years now, I've been able to see things getting restored at the Hamel House specifically. For example, the greenhouse. They added in new glass since I've started teaching this curriculum. They have, just this year, restored an original rug that was in one of the rooms. So the students that got to go this year were the first students to get to walk on the new rug that has been restored. You can't see it in this picture, but over on this side of the Hamel House, they have a scaffold up right now. They're repairing the siding, they're doing some work there. So the students get to see this preservation in action going on. Miss Hale, who led our tour, she was telling the students that in the future they're hoping to get the wallpaper restored and puts up some of the original wallpaper. So it's the Hamel House specifically is a really cool place for students to see that the benefits of preservation, but also, like I said, preservation is an ongoing process, and it's important that people care enough to continue to preserve these places. At this location, we also had a couple of students who were studying people that were connected to the Hamel House. So here we have Grayson. He was studying Mr. Hamel. So there he is sitting in his study there. And then we have Ethan here standing in front of his hotel. He was studying W.E. Barton. And the picture on the wall here is of the Barton House. We also get to see places like the Energy Museum that have been both museums highlighting the history of the original business while still being active, at least up until this last year. So that's a kind of cool transitional phase that students get to see of places that have been open as museums but are still actively being businesses as well. Neisel and Anderson is another amazing example of a business that maintains a very strong and rich history while still continuing to be an active and open business in Georgetown. So the students love to get to go on this field trip. They love seeing the mixture of the old and the new, being on the grocery side. A lot of students have already been there to buy candy at some point. But then especially to get to go over to the hardware side is a really fun experience. And they really love seeing and imagining and picking up different things and wondering what they were used for and what they're there for. The ladder is always a great favorite, getting to climb up the ladder. And here we have Sebastian. He was studying Henry Neisel. So I had him take a picture like he was grabbing something for a customer and bringing it down off the shelf. Within our unit, we also understand geographically and geologically some of the aspects of Georgetown. So geographically, we always start our unit by situating Georgetown within the state, as well as going on a creek chase, where we follow South Clear Creek into town, starting at the base of Leavenworth Mountain, and we get to see how a town is built around geographic features. We then follow North Clear Creek back up to see where it enters Georgetown from Silver Plume. We discuss the necessity of building a town around a water source, but we also discuss the difficulties of building in the mountains and the limit that the natural geography puts on the development of Georgetown. So we do always start, before we go on our hike, we create a map routing out where we're going to go, and then along the way, we stop at different points and take notes of some of the geographic features we see. Once we see how Georgetown developed geographically, we then discuss its development from a viewpoint of its citizens and the development of the town over time. We always determine the difference between a residential part of town versus a business district. And we keep in mind, as we go on our architecture walk, all of the different people and businesses that are necessary for a town to be successful. Miss Cindy Neely always leads our architecture walk, and we get to focus on where many of Georgetown's past citizens lived, and then we focus specifically on 3 different buildings in town to see the development over time. So on this screen we see the Johnson Cabin. We start at the Johnson Cabin, and this cabin represents some of the earliest structures here in Georgetown. The students always notice that, it's obviously built from logs. It's very kind of rustic and rural looking. Simple shapes, it's small. When they sketch it, it's very easy. It's a rectangle and a triangle. And so the Johnson Cabin is showing, some of those earlier miners that were here, but not necessarily thinking permanently. They were thinking, we'll get here, we'll make some money, and we'll get out. We then go and we look at the Tucker Rutherford Cottage, which represents the more permanent structures that began to develop as people moved to Georgetown to put down roots as miners and store owners. The Tucker brothers owned the cottage here. They were store owners in town. So we discuss as a class the obvious additions that have been put on as people decided they were going to more permanently stay. We discuss the fact that now there's siding added and not just those rough logs that they see. And then finally, we take a look at the Bowman White House. And we can notice that the architecture here tells us pretty clearly a story about the kind of people that built the structures similar to the Bowman White House and the Bowman White House itself. It's much more detailed. It's larger. Clearly someone who built it had a lot of wealth, and they had an intention to stay and put down roots in Georgetown. So you can see as you walk through Georgetown the intentionality of people wanting to build their lives here, and they made sure that they put down the roots to do so. At this point, when we're standing in front of the Bowman White House, inevitably a student will be like, I don't know how to draw this, because it's just so much more complex than what we started with the Johnson Cabin. So we talk about breaking it down into simple shapes, starting, doing it almost in thirds, and taking the time to kind of envision it that way, because it is an overwhelming prospect when you stand in front of it and think, I have to draw this. Continuing our discussion of town development, we study in depth several Sanborn Fire insurance maps that were created for Georgetown in the late 1800s, early 1900s. These maps are awesome. They offer a really unique snapshot, and you can see exactly what businesses and buildings were there at this time. We look at 2 dates in particular. We look at 1886 and 1907. We look at a date before the Sherman-Silver Purchase Act was repealed. Georgetown is thriving. Then we look at a date after the Sherman-Silver Purchase Act was repealed, and we analyze to see if there are differences between the town at those 2 points. Each student, in order to do this, receives a role-playing card. And on that card, it gives them a role to play, and it tells them to look for specific businesses, which they are then to highlight using different colors. Each map has the same role based on the year, but the language of the roles are very different. For the roles for 1886, you have much more positive and hopeful verbiage. For the roles for 1907, the language is a little bit more negative, a little bit more desperate. So, for example, here is just one of the examples. The year is 1886, and you are an aspiring entrepreneur, new to Georgetown. You are hoping to set up a shop and are looking for vacant buildings. What are your options? highlight all of the vacant buildings using an orange marker. On these maps, any vacant building would have had the label VAC on it for vacant. Similarly, the year is 1907, and you are a struggling entrepreneur and landlord in Georgetown, trying to take stock of your many vacant buildings. Where are they? Highlight all of the vacant buildings using an orange marker. So both sets of students are able to determine their different roles and search out their different buildings. Then we take the maps at the end and we analyze to see if we can see any differences. The takeaways from these two maps are that there are slightly more vacancies to be found in 1907, as well as whole blocks of businesses that no longer exist. But probably the most important takeaway that we discuss is that in 1886, you have a bunch of mining and milling operations and businesses on the outskirts of town that by 1907 are no longer there. So the students can really see concretely how a town has changed over a period of just a few decades. We obviously cannot discuss the history and town building of Georgetown without talking about its people and demographics. So early on in our unit, we complete a map search to see the different groups of people in Colorado's history who have left their mark through the names that we can still see throughout Colorado. Up north, you can see a lot more French names, like Cache-la-Poudre River, Lafayette, left over from the French trappers that came from the north down into Colorado. In the south, there are obviously a lot more Spanish-influenced names, like the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, Durango, Los Animas, and those are left from the Spaniards that came looking for gold. And then throughout the state of Colorado, you have evidence of the Native American tribes that lived here before them all. The Sawatch, Uncompahgre Peak, Yampa River, Niwot, and so forth. So these two photos are the students doing that map search, looking for names that they feel have a French or a Spanish or maybe a Native American influence that show the different people that lived in Colorado. We then focus specifically on the miners that came and were the reason Georgetown was established and thrived. We discuss the different types of mining, and we get to pan for pennies, which is always really fun. I have 10 pennies that I put in there, and each one has the date of the penny, and that is equivalent to the worth of the penny. So the older the penny, the more it's worth. And so they're looking for that latest penny, or that earliest penny, excuse me. We talk about mining and milling. We talk about how silver mining was a much more challenging prospect than gold mining. It required a company. You couldn't necessarily silver mine just on your own. You had to be working for a mine. And after we talk about the milling process, we go up and we look at the Centennial Mill. This is one of those field trips that is just crazy to me as a teacher, that I get to live and work in this place, because I can literally call on the phone and say, hey, we're popping up to the Centennial Mill, we'll be back in 10 minutes. And we get to go and look at this mill and then be back in our classroom in 10 minutes. And just to be able to do that is amazing. We then get to look at, if you've never been on Clear Maps, it's a really cool website. So Clear Creek County has some interactive maps that we get to check out. And we focus obviously specifically on Georgetown and Silver Plume, but all of these little rectangles here are mining claims. And so the students can zoom in and they get to see all of the plethora of mining claims and the crazy names that the people have named these places. And then they get to imagine, if they owned a claim, what would they name it? So finally, we read several accounts of life in Georgetown in the early 20th century, and the students write an essay comparing life in Georgetown now versus life in Georgetown 100 years ago. What are the similarities? What are the differences? Besides the economics of mining, we also talk about shop owners. And we complete a really fun, in my view, activity that's called Cheating the Miners, where students pretend that they have just moved to town, they're hoping to strike it rich, and they need to buy supplies from a local shop owner. I become Mr. O'Flanagan for this role, and it's really fun. They start a credit line of $20, so I give them a $20 gold coin, and then they, in their Colorado History Journals, start a credit line that is $20, and then as I go through different items to sell, if they like to buy that item, they write down the item and the cost, and they work a running account of how much they've spent. What they don't know, the trick, is that at first I only show the first poster that has items that I make it sound like are absolutely essential, and they are really going to need those. But they don't realize that there is a second poster that only after I've gone through all the items and I've ensured that just about everybody is out of money, then I show the second poster. And I get cries of dismay every year. It's wonderful. But at that point then, out of the kindness of my heart, I offer to buy back some of the items that I had just sold to them at a certain price. I will offer to buy it back for less than I sold it to them. So they can get some money, so they can then purchase some of the items that they really would need if they were coming to be a minor in Georgetown. So, we discuss along the way opportunity cost and the constant choices surrounding finance that people have to make every single day. The point connecting to history is that while many people hoped to make it rich as miners, this was very rare. And more often than not, the people who owned and ran the mines and the shop owners were the ones who could more reliably be counted on to be successful. Our discussion of economics continues as we explore 3 old-time tourist attractions. And we recognize that tourism has always been a part of Georgetown's history. Yes, Georgetown is a mining town, but from very early on, tourism was another economic pursuit of the people living in Georgetown. So the 3 that we study are the Sunrise Peak Aerial Tramway, the Argentine Central Railroad, and the Georgetown Loop Railroad. Students choose an attraction and then they create a persuasive brochure highlighting one of the 3, trying to attract people to come to their tourist attraction. Afterwards, you are welcome to check out. Over here, we have our display that I broke down and made into smaller form here, so you can see the students' brochures that they've written, as well as we always build a miniature aerial tramway. The students love to get to create their own little carts. And we always include rocks because they would have tested the aerial tramway with 300 pounds of rocks in each cart and ran it at full speed to see if it was safe enough for people to ride in it. So we have little rocks in our carts as well. So like I said, please feel free to check that out afterwards. As mentioned, our whole curriculum leads up to a culminating research project where students choose a person to study from Georgetown's past. We use many primary and secondary sources, such as primary sources. We take a look at the Colorado Historic Newspapers collection. This is another incredible website that I highly recommend if you are even a little bit interested in history. This is an amazing website that has collected, I'm going to say all, of Colorado's historic newspapers, and it's digitized them, so that you can actively search for a specific person, a specific event in a search bar, and it will bring you different options. So the students take a look for their person in some of the historic newspapers, and then we also get a plethora of books from the library. Thank you, Lily. We get a ton of books that and pamphlets that are supposed to be reference only. We're not supposed to take them out of the library, but we get them. So we get to, the students then spend several days looking through lots of different books, some of them written by Miss Bradley, and the students are then writing and trying to answer the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why. So who are they? What did they do in Georgetown? Where did they live, work, or visit in Georgetown? When did they live, work, or visit in Georgetown? And why are they important to Georgetown's history? After they have taken notes and they've kind of compiled their ideas, they then turn that into a paragraph about their person. This leads us then to our presentation. So every year the students get costumes together and we spend an afternoon filming our presentations. Tonight we are lucky enough to have several historic figures here, and they are going to present now before we see presentations from people who couldn't be here in person tonight. So please join me in a journey to the past and help me welcome several historic figures here tonight. Mr. George Griffith.
Hello there. My name is George Griffith. My brother and I came to live in this area in 1859 looking for gold. We found some and set up the Griffith Mining District, where I worked and mined and where I helped establish mining claims for others. I lived at the base of Griffith Mountain, not far away from my and my brother's mining properties. I lived in Georgetown until 1865, when the gold mining started to dry up. I moved away from Georgetown to become a prospector elsewhere, and then moved to Durango, Mexico. I died in Austin, Texas in 1880. I'm important to Georgetown's history because I helped found it.
Next up, we have Mr. Louis Dupuis.
Hello, I am Louis Dupuis. I worked and cooked at and owned the Hotel de Paris in Georgetown, Colorado. I lived at the Hotel de Paris too. I was born in 1845 and came to Georgetown in 1870. Did you know my real name is actually Adolphus? I changed it to Louis because I was running from the past. I wrote stuff other people wrote and got credit for it. When I got in trouble for stealing, I moved somewhere else and ran away from my problems. I got sent as a soldier to post in Wyoming, but deserted in 1869 and fled to Colorado, where I started calling myself Louis. Before I worked at the hotel, I was a miner. When I was mining, I got hurt in an explosion and saved other people in the explosion. After that, I decided I wanted to be better. So I bought the hotel and worked on it, called it Hotel de Paris. I studied a lot, but one good day I got pneumonia, and my doctor told me not to take any more cold baths, which I loved. Well, I was getting better. One day, I felt better, but I took another cold bath, even though I was not supposed to. And after that, I died in October. I was part of the Hotel de Paris, and I saved people in my accident.
All right, next up, we have Mr. W.E. Barton.
Hello, my name is W.E. Barton, and I own the Barton Hotel in Georgetown, Colorado. I was born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts in 1848. My father came to Georgetown in 1866 and built the first Barton house. I moved to Georgetown a year later and worked for my father in the hotel. Unfortunately, that burned in 1871. I rebuilt it later that same year and was the new owner. The next year, I sold it and moved back to Boston. In 1876, however, I returned to Georgetown and bought back the hotel. My hotel was large, beautiful, and elegant. People loved to stay there because I did a great job running it. The hotel was eventually taken down in the 1930s, and the new Georgetown School was built in the same location as it is right now. In 1966, they covered the school with siding to make it look more like my hotel. I am important to Georgetown because I owned the Barton House and offered a wonderful place for people visiting Georgetown.
All right, last but not least, here in person tonight, we have Mr. Charlie Utter.
well as being a trapper who could catch beavers and raccoons for their hide. While I lived in Empire, I had a billiard hall, and I married a woman named Matilda. Her nickname was Tilly. We decided to move to Georgetown in 1867, where there I built the pioneer stables that would hold horses and donkeys as part of my trading business called the Blue Line. I'm famous in other parts of the country because I was friends with Wild Bill Hickok. I became friends with him in South Dakota after I left Georgetown in 1876 to go find gold there. Additionally, I was good friends with the Utes and quickly mastered their language. In the summer, I would often spend my time with the Native Americans. I'm important to Georgetown's history because I was very active in the town and owned several businesses there. I also represent the adventurous spirit that many people living back then had.
All right, well, thank you all so much for traveling through time and space to get here. We appreciate it. Okay, now we have several students who could not be here. We're going to watch some videos from them. So we will start with Mr. Robert Roschlaub.
Hello, I'm Robert Rothschild, an architect of Georgetown. I helped remodel the Hamel House and I designed the church house, seen here. In the Eckland House, I was born in Munich, Germany, and I moved around a lot. I did not stay in one area much. I visited Georgetown in 1876 and I left in 1879. Here are some fun facts about me. 1, I was the first licensed architect in the state of Colorado. 2, I designed the Corona School and the Chamberlain Observatory in Denver, along with many other buildings. I'm important to Georgetown history because I designed some of the best-known buildings in Georgetown that are still standing today.
Next up, we will watch George's brother, David Griffith.
Howdy, my name is David Griffith. In August of 1859, my brother George Griffith and I traveled up the valley, following Clear Creek looking for gold. We found some here and left for the winter, but then returned in 1860 and founded what would become known as Georgetown. When we came back, we opened a gold mill, but it was too expensive to run, so it shut down in 1862. I lived at the base of Griffith Mountain in a tent because there were no permanent buildings yet. My brother George left Georgetown soon after, but I stayed until my death in 1882. I was important because I helped found and organize Georgetown. However, I'm mad that it's not Griffith's plan.
I'm Henry Nizel. I owned and worked at Nizel and Anderson's on 6th Street. I live in Georgetown and started the business in 1888. Emil Anderson, the co-owner, became my son-in-law, and we became business partners in 1892. We had a bakery in the back of the shop and a hardware store next to the grocery store. My great-granddaughter still runs the store today, and it's the oldest store in Georgetown. I'm important because I own the grocery store so people can get food and baked goods.
All right, next we will hear from Miss Sophie Galley.
Bonjour. I am Sophie Galley. I was a housekeeper at Hotel de Paris in Georgetown, Colorado, where I worked for Louis Dupuis. He was my nephew, and he and I got along very well. Because I worked at the hotel a lot,
I also lived there. In fact, Louie let me have a room, and I did not need to pay for the room. I moved to Georgetown in 1887 from France with my husband, who unfortunately disappeared in the mines later on. During the Christmas parties, I was Louie's only helper. I would help carry some stuff, and Louie would carry cakes and wine. I was very respected. The kids in Georgetown called me Aunt Sophie. I spoke French and a little English. So Louis's last words were, "Sophie, give me a cold glass of champagne." Before he died on his bed in October of 1900, unfortunately, I died soon after in 1901 in my bed, just like how Louis did. I was buried right next to Louis, and on my tombstone it said, "To the friends" in French. I was important because I helped Louis keep the hotel clean in order and help make it attractive to tourists visiting Georgetown.
Next up, we have Mr. William Hamill.
Oh, my name is William Penn. I was an important mine owner in Georgetown, Colorado. I owned a dice falcon and terrible mines and silver plume, and I became very rich doing so. I lived in what became known as the Hamill House, which I purchased from my brother-in-law, Joseph Watson, and I hired Robert Hirschlaw to make it bigger. My office was in my house, and I did all my work there. I'm pretty important because I had one of the first homes in Georgetown. I also owned lots of mines and provided jobs for many people.
And last but not least, we have Miss Veronica Elliott.
Hello, my name is Veronica Elliott. I was born in 1905 in the county courthouse in Empire, Colorado, where my grandmother Riley was working in the early 1900s. I lived in Georgetown with my parents and 4 siblings. My father was a miner in Silverman at the Mendoza mine. I always got shivers down my spine when I heard the mine accident whistle blow because I never knew if something happened to my father. When I was 16, he died. He did die from mining disease. When I grew older, I moved to Dumont to begin my teaching career. I worked as a teacher there for 2 years. Then I went to Nevada and found and married my beloved Lord Elliot before moving back to Colorado. We eventually bought a house across from the Hamill House in Georgetown. I was important to Georgetown's history because I helped preserve its history by writing about my life in Georgetown and the surrounding area. One of my 7 children, Tom Elliott, still lives in Georgetown today.
All right. Well, thank you so much to both our presenters here and our presenters on the screen. We are going to, right now, I'm going to invite my students to take your chairs and we're going to form a line right here for a very brief question and answer. For this part, they are themselves, 4th grade students at Georgetown Community School. To as well. So I will ask the question and then I will ask you for your response and we'll just kind of figure out the order as we go along. Okay? So what was your favorite activity we did or field trip we went on during this unit? And we're going to start with Ethan.
It was us going to the Hamill House.
Why?
Because there's a portrait of the Bart in his home.
What about for you, Wes?
I liked going to the animal house because it was really big.
What about for you, Finn?
My favorite activity was when we panned for pennies looking for the one that read 1965 and I found it.
All right, you found the oldest penny when we panned for pennies. And Lakin, what about for you?
My favorite field trip was the animal.
Was the Hamel House. Very popular. Excellent. Very nice. My next question is, what would you say is the most interesting thing you learned during this unit? And this time, Lakin, we're going to start with you.
The most interesting thing I learned this unit was this town wouldn't be here. George didn't accidentally find gold.
Yeah, absolutely. So George finding gold is what sparked it all. I love it. Finn, what about for you?
The most interesting fact I learned is that sometimes in the Hotel de Paris, you would sleep with a complete stranger.
Have to share a bed with a complete stranger. Very cool. Wes, what about for you?
About Louis Dupuis and everything he did.
His life. He had a very interesting life. And Ethan, what about for you?
The most interesting that I learned in this unit is learning about W.E. Burton in the past.
Nice. And then finally, our final question, why do you think that it's important to learn about and preserve local history? And we are going to start with Wes.
Because in the future, people can see and learn about the history of Georgetown.
Nice. Ethan, what about for you?
So other people in the future can see what's beyond the past.
Nice. Finn?
So it can pass through generations and not be like the dark times.
Not be like, we learned the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, and how a lot of people forgot things that had once been known. So learning about your local history is very important. Nice. What about for you, Lincoln?
I think it's important to preserve local history to understand everything from the past.
Okay. Very nice. Thank you so much. All right, as a final note, I would like to thank again our presenters and their parents for making tonight possible. So one more round of applause. I would also like to again thank our community members who make this possible and who have put in the good work to allow our history to be preserved and continued, so students like these and many others can continue to learn and appreciate our past. My hope is that with units and exposure like these, it inspires future generations to continue this good work. Thank you all.